No.
I didn't think you're much of a hat guy. But I'll get some shirts out for those. Should link out to everybody. That way I can order all at once.
I'd love one. I'd wear it proudly.
Yes. I've got the dark blue and the light blue. Which one would you prefer?
Light blue.
Light blue. All right, good.
Maybe blue is my color.
All right, let's go on here. All right, everybody. Well, hey, we are back with our first session here at the Mass Media Podcast Summit, and could not think of a better person to start off on Sunday morning than my buddy James Beach, who is got a great thing lined up here for you guys. This guy is doing so many great things to leverage his podcast, but also helping other podcasters out there do some great stuff as well. And he's got this amazing thing. I hope he goes into it on his presentation. If not, I'll make sure and ask him questions about it. But our buddy here, Jim, is the head of and the founder of the School for Startups Radio, which has been around for years. Absolutely an award-winning, not only radio host, but an author. He's won several SBA awards. This guy just kicks butt and takes names. And so he's AM/FM, nationally syndicated radio host on over 25 stations. He does 6 shows a week. As I said before, SBA award-winning. He gets about 150,000 listeners a day. A day, not a month, a day, everybody. So without further ado, we're honored to have James Beach join us here on the Mass Media Podcast Summit. What's up, Jim?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good, man. Excited to have you.
Thank you so much for including me. I'm still mad that this is not a live event. I should tell everyone, I texted you about 10 days ago saying your website sucks. I can't find the hotel information on here. Where's the hotel? Where are we staying?
Uh-huh.
And then you texted back saying, dude, you are such a moron. It's a live virtual event. I was sitting on delta.com ready to buy airline tickets. I had babysitters already lined up for the kids while I was gone. Everything.
Well, you know what? The next time we do this, we may have to do it in person. We've had a lot of people that have enjoyed the online aspect of it, but I'd have been glad to hang out. And that's the thing, like when we hung out in Orlando and we've hung out in Tampa and other places or here in Austin, it's just a great time. And, you know, a lot of people have been speaking on here and vice versa. And it's, it's a great mastermind. We get the 30 of us together. Watch out, world. Things are shaking and baking. I know that you've done some stuff with Tom and Tracy and vice versa, then Aaron Young and a few others that are rocking and rolling. So, yeah, it's I would agree. I miss you, buddy, and want to come hang out as well.
I would like to get together. I think I was the one that told Kim Sutton to start her show 3 or 4 years ago.
Yes, you were. Yes, you were. So it's and
I'm in bed with lots of the other people here.
Yep, exactly. We all run in from familiar circles. So I think you messaged me this morning. You got some slides you want to share, and then we'll go through the slides and then jump off on those and go back and forth and field questions from the audience. Sound good, Jim?
All right, sure. Do I hit the share button here?
Yep, share button. It should pop up your screen with what you've got open. Share your PowerPoint from there. There we go. Okay, and then just put it in presentation when you're good to go.
All right.
Look at you. So proud.
All right. So thank you for having me, Scott, and I'm looking forward to sharing some of this information. I chose this topic and this title to be provocative intentionally. I know the history of podcast is designed to disrupt and destroy radio, and podcast is new and radio is old and bad. And why would anyone want to be going backwards to radio? And I certainly have had those feelings myself. I started off as a podcaster. I consider myself a podcaster first and foremost. And I agree with you in many ways. It's going backwards. We are trying to destroy the broken radio system. On the other hand, there's a lot of good that we can still suck from it in the meantime. And so that's what I want to talk about today, and just sort of share some of the things that I have encountered and learned in radio land about their thoughts about podcasters and what we do and how we could get better, how we could get a little bit more prepared. and just some of the benefits that I've encountered from being in podcasting and radio. So just a little bit about my show. Scott was really kind to mention this, most of this already. We're 7 years old. We're coming up right on 1,500 episodes. 5 years ago, I started on the radio. We do 6 shows a week, though I will say that not 100% of those are original. We have some shows that we do that are repeats based on the syndication network that it goes out on. And I can explain that later if anyone has an interest. Also, Scott was very kind to mention that I've won a small business award for this show. And that is something that I'm one of my themes today is going to be brand names. And I'm obsessed with wrapping my brand, my product, in other people's products and other people's brand names. And so that's one of the reasons I like going and getting these awards. They don't really help much, except that they wrap you in a brand name that makes it easier for me to go and do my primary thing, which is to sell to sponsors and ads and things like that. So we'll come back to this later, and I can show you the formula on how to get a small business award. I think that it's something you can replicate very easily. I am on 25 AM FM stations, and I will probably say that most of them suck, and we'll talk about that later as well. And 21 different internet platforms, all the ones that you've heard of as well. My strategy is sort of simple. I want to be everywhere. I want to be ubiquitous so that it's easy to find and on any of the platforms. And we all know that iTunes is 95% of the market, we would think, in podcasting. Well, I look at my numbers and I get a huge percent of my listeners off of iTunes, and I get a pretty good on iTunes. So and I'll tell you this, I do pay to be promoted on iTunes so that I rank higher there. And we can talk about that if you want to. But even doing that, I still get a tremendous number of listeners, downloads off of other internet platforms. So I find them useful. But anyway, my strategy is ubiquity. And there are some of the AM FM stations that I'm on. You can see that there's some good cities and some bad cities. Washington, D.C. is not on here. I need to add that, but we're in Washington, St. Louis, Las Vegas, Long Beach, Tampa, Jacksonville, places like that. And some really junky places that I've never heard of. Show Low, Arizona, for example. I looked it up, population 60. And I've also had some really great guests, and I'm not doing this to brag, but to show there's a reason I want to show you some of the guests that I have. Huge list of entrepreneurs, famous entrepreneurs, billionaires on this list, some really, really amazing companies. And I do want to point out that 99% of my guests come through publicists, which is a huge advantage. I spend 0 time looking for guests, and I need a lot of guests. I have 6 shows a week. I usually do 2 to 3 guests per show, 54 minutes per show. And so I burn through a lot of guests, 15, 20 guests a week sometimes. And so when you do that, I can't go find them. It doesn't make sense. Almost all, 99% of my guests come through my publicist network. And I have shared this list before. I will share with you the publicists that I'm in contact with. I have about 70 that I am in contact with, and they feed my show. And because of that, it just makes it so much easier. They auto schedule. There's a matter of fact, a lot of the publicists I've given the link permanently. They don't even have to ask anymore. They just schedule people, and boom, all of a sudden a guest shows up on my schedule. And that guest comes with complete bio. All of the research is already done, all of the pictures and everything that you would ever hope for. And of course, the list of questions, which I, of course, look at, but then try to ignore. But anyway, lots of thought leaders as well. These are the Simon Sineks and all of these people. I'm sure you've heard a lot of them. But this is really the list that I wanted to point out to you. This list of corporate guests. For example, the CEO of Cisco, and I had recently the CEO of AT&T, and I've had the CFO of Pixar, and I get really good corporate guests. Good in the sense of the fact that they are big brand names. But on the other hand, almost all of these guests are bad guests. They just not good. They suck. And I always bury this at the end of the show. If I have 3 guests, this would be the third guest, and I would give them 10 to 12 minutes, whereas a normal guest would get 20 to 22 minutes. Excuse me. But having said that, these guests make it super, super easy for me to go out there in the sponsorship land and to tell people you are safe being a sponsor of my show. Look at the other people who've already been on my show, people who are your competitors. So for example, if I'm going to Wells Fargo and saying, hey, Wells Fargo, you should sponsor my show, the guy I would talk to is the very bottom one on this list, the Senior Vice President of Small Business Banking, Sean Maybe. But what I would point out to him is that his competitor, I'm looking to see if she is on the list. No, Sharon Miller of Bank of America, who is the Senior Vice President of Small Business Banking at Bank of America, is on my show once a month. So I'm going to point out to him, your competitor has already validated my show, my product. And I think this is important. Again, I'm wrapping my show in the credibility of other people's brand names. My show wouldn't be good if these people weren't on the show. These people being on the show gives the show huge credibility, and therefore you should sponsor my show, you should buy ads on my show, or you should pay to be on my show. And I will tell you, I do have paid guests. About half of the people on this list would be a paid guest, which is amazing. For example, someone came to me and said, would you put the CEO of Coldwell Banker on? I'm like, well, hell yes, I would put that on, of course. And then they say, and we'll pay you, because it's a corporate guest. And I was like, I'm double winning here. I'm getting a great guest.
Nice.
The CEO of one of the biggest companies out there, a huge brand name, and they're paying me to do it. And so again, I'm pointing out the benefits of this, and this is going to add up. We're not done with this idea yet. Was that you, Scott, laughing at me?
Yes, I love it. I love it. I'm here.
Well,
yeah.
It works. It works. So the sponsors feel safe. The sponsors can easily go to their boss, because here's the situation. You have to go to a vice president or something like that and say, you should sponsor my show. They're going to have to shop it around internally. And for them to go and say, look at the people he's had before, it gives it the validation. And again, every single one of those people came in through my network of publicists. And again, I will share that list with you. Just makes the sponsors feel safe. And here's another point that I sort of want to do before I get started too much. And Scott's already talked about downloads. I don't count downloads. Downloads are something we invented. We podcasters invented downloads. And we're trying to impose that idea on the world that pays money for media. They don't like it. They don't want to talk about downloads. Downloads don't mean anything to them because of this. 90% of the people that you talk to about downloads have 40 shows on their tablet that they have downloaded that they haven't listened to yet. And so the people we're trying to sell stuff to don't count downloads. And all of us podcasters, we're obsessed with it because that's the easiest metric. That's the metric we have, right? And I'm going to point out that listeners are what our marketplace is used to. The people that we're going to go into and try to get money from count listeners, not downloads. And it's a huge distinction. And so I want you to start changing your mind about that. And this is one of the first things that I think that us podcasters just simply do wrong. We've invented a word, we're imposing it, and the world doesn't want it, and we're still obsessed with it. And so here's one thing where I think the radio industry is right. Count listeners, not downloads. The buyers, the people who sell ads, the media buyers, they're used to that. So let's go with what they're used to. All right, that was sort of my preamble agenda, or my things I wanted to get off my chest. There's some more of that. But here are the three topics that I really want to dive into. I want to just very briefly talk about why podcasting, the weaknesses of podcasting, what we as podcasters could do better. And then I want to talk about why I still believe that radio rocks. And I'm going to show you everything I know about how to get into radio. So if you're interested in getting into radio, I'm going to tell you everything I know, everything I've done, every step that I've taken so that you can get your show up there too. I'm going to try to convince you that it's a good idea, and then I'm going to show you how to do it. And finally, I am going to talk about what Scott was referring to, Pod 24. It is a new product of mine that I think can be very helpful in achieving two goals for you. Number one, getting more listeners. And number two, getting an AM FM syndication. So I can get you tomorrow, overnight, syndicated nationally with some AM FM stations. And we'll talk about that as part of the Pod 24. So Pod 24 is something I've been working on for 5 or 6 months. And some of the people, Scott's been following the story as it's been going along. And this week, we started advertising. So I'll tell you this. We've raised a bunch of money. I went out into the venture space and got a bunch of money. And the venture space was very receptive. And I was able to get money from the first person I asked. And that money has been used to go out and build awareness for Pod 24. And I think I'm going to blow you away at the end when I tell you the numbers we've already got here in our first week of advertising. My numbers in week one, I bet, are going to be larger than some of your entire listenerships. So we'll come back to that. And again, my goal, I want to get you more listeners, and I want to get more of you on the old-fashioned radio. And here's my joke goal, and I say this sort of facetiously, but I mean it 100%. Being a best-selling author used to mean something. So when I started my radio show 7 years ago, or podcast 7 years ago, to have a best-selling author was a big deal. But as I've come along and as I do more and more of this, and now as I burn through 20 guests a week, every single one of them is a best-selling author. And so that term has become totally meaningless. Amazon ruined it. And it's 100% Amazon's fault, right? So the old lists, the New York Times list, the USA Today list, those sort of lists are almost impossible to game. And the only way to game them is to go out and buy thousands and thousands of books, right? So there are companies that can go to they think, perfect bookstores and buy books so that you get on the New York Times bestseller list. That exists. But what Amazon did was made it so easy to get on the list, and they changed the definition of what it means to be on the list, right? So because they have all of these subcategories, there are thousands and thousands of lists. So I am the best. I was number one in my category. Well, okay, there's 12,000 categories. You were number one, which means you sold 8 books, 8. And you get you and your friends together at 2:00 on a Tuesday and you game it, and all of you buy a book and you go to number one in your category. So being a best-selling author has become 100% meaningless. Great. I want to do the exact same for the term nationally syndicated radio host. Right now, I think it's a little prestigious. I don't know if I'm just egotistical or what, a little prestigious to think that nationally syndicated radio host means a big deal. And I'm going to talk about this a lot more in just a second. Other people seem to think that it's a big deal too. My goal is to ruin that, to make everybody a nationally syndicated radio host, just like Amazon made everybody a best-selling author. I want to take you and make you a nationally syndicated radio host. And I think we can do that overnight. And so that's my little joke. I want to destroy that term and make it just as useless as being a best-selling author. All right. So I want to introduce the term laddering. This is not something I came up with. Laddering is the name of a book by Eric Holtzclaw, another great podcaster you may know. It's also a Wall Street term when you ladder certain deals so that they sell one a day. You buy stock and you sell it off one a day so that anyway, it's a Wall Street term that I don't understand. I'm not a Wall Street guy. What I want to talk about, though, is this idea that you can use your podcast and hopefully radio to ladder the rest of your career. So when I talk about being an author, and I have 2 books out, both of my books, I happen to be sitting next to one of them right here. This is School for Startups. the first book I did before I was on the radio or podcasting. That book hugely helped my career. It helped my speaking fees. It helped my ability to get on podcast, all that. But I was lucky. It was published by McGraw-Hill. I got a brand name publisher for my first book. And I love this story, so I'll brag. This is bragging. I'll brag this a little bit. Everyone talks about how hard it is to find a real publisher, a traditional Main Street New York publisher. And it is, it's very hard. And you hear these stories about people sending off 100 letters and getting 99 rejections. And finally, the 100th publishing house said yes. McGraw-Hill said yes. They were the only people we contacted. Our first letter, our only letter, got us a book deal in 1 week. And it was because the thesis of the book was so unique. So anyway, there's my little brag. Huge benefit to the rest of my career, right? So my speaking fee went up. I was on hundreds of podcasts and radio shows because of that. I was on CNN because of that. As a matter of fact, CNN, this is one of my favorite tricks about the media, CNN called me the Simon Cowell of small business. Now, I don't know if that's an insult or a compliment, but it's certainly, to people at an event, if I get introduced that way, it certainly makes it come across that I'm an expert in that space, right? I think it's fair to say that that introduction makes it clear that I'm an expert in small business. And so CNN said that. And so now I can brag that CNN said that about me. Well, here's a little inside. The producer at CNN said, hey, we're going to put your name at the bottom of the screen. What do you want it to say? I was like, well, yeah. What about Simon Cowell Small Business? And they're like, oh, that's great. We'll do that. I wrote that line.
Awesome.
I wrote that line, right? And then CNN quoted it, and now CNN is in my media pack, right? All because of this idea. So here's what I think happens. I think the podcast is going to help your career. Absolutely, no doubt. I think, though, that if we change that to radio, you now get a book deal faster. You now get in front of the line for speaking engagements. It's easier for your coaching career, and your brand is improved. Overall, it helps every other part of your business, your career. All of us as media people, as podcasters, you know, everything we do, we want more Twitter followers. You're going to get more Twitter followers and Instagram followers. I hate Instagram and Twitter, but anyway, you're going to get more followers by being nationally syndicated radio host. I know that's true. And I know my speaking fee went up. My speaking fee before was $500 or something. And now I get paid in the multiple thousands of dollars for a 45-minute because nationally syndicated radio host. Anyway, I think this concept of laddering is one of the primary reasons that I will defend radio to the end. So if I have two speakers, speaker A and speaker B, and I need to put one into my event, and I have 1,000 insurance salesmen coming to Las Vegas, I'm going to hire one of these two people, and they're both the same. The quality is the same. Everything's the same. But one of them is nationally syndicated radio host and the other's a podcaster. You're going to look better by having the nationally syndicated radio host. It's just simple. So you choose that person. That person gets the speaking gig as opposed to the podcaster. The assumptions are, right? If we talk about what the world thinks about podcasting, is that any moron can have a podcast. And that's true, right? There are 600, 700,000 of them now, 100,000 being added a year right now. And there is no entry standard, right? Absolutely no entry standard. We have kids in the neighborhood and do a podcast. They're 8 and 5 and they have a podcast. And, you know, I've never listened to it. I'm sure it's hysterical. I'm sure it's great. But again, that's the entry level standard. Whereas radio is somehow limited, selective, and you would assume that somehow it's curated, right? You would assume that the radio station selected you for some reason, right? Whether that's true or not is sort of beside the point. And I will tell you the story of Neil Bortz. I don't know if any of you remember Neil Bortz. He was a famous libertarian radio host on the air for 30 years, was inducted into the Radio Hall of Fame. He was driving to work one day. He was a lawyer, and he heard on the radio station that our host died last night. Our host had a heart attack, and so we're going to go to tape or something. Well, he turned his car around, drove to the station, walked in and said, "I can host." And within 5 minutes, he was on the air and thus started a 30-year Hall of Fame career. Sometimes it's that simple. If they have an hour to fill, they're going to fill it. They don't care, really. And so the standard is pretty low, though I think a lot of people, the industry, gives it more credibility than it deserves. And I've already talked about this. It's easier to get speaking deals, publishing deals, coaching clients. And for all of us, I think that sponsors come a lot easier as well. So here is the average podcaster, right? The joke that you are doing this in your underwear, I think, is truer than a lot of us would admit. I would give $1,000 to do a survey, an honest survey of how many podcasters have done a show inappropriately dressed. But nevertheless, this is the perception that we're dealing with, right? This is what people think of us. The joke is, as any good joke, has a little bit of truth to it. There's a tiny bit, a tiny kernel of truth to this. So it's our job to overcome that and to do everything we can to escape this. We have no standards for podcasts. We don't have a set time, a commercial, whatever. I've had shows where there's not an introduction. You know, I've been on a show where the guy starts off and goes, "Hey, this is the beginning of the show. We're excited for our first guest." You know, I just don't think that sounds good, right? And so we have all of these abilities as podcasters to do whatever we want. But at the same time, no one's telling us, dude, that's just not good. It's just not good, right? And so I hope that all of us, me included, are out there setting some standards and saying, here is what we're going to hold ourselves to the standard of, and we're going to ask somebody who knows something to judge us and to give us critique. So I listened to a show the other day. It was on UCLA radio, broadcasting live on the radio, and the host talked in a monotone the entire time like this and never did anything different with their voice, and it was one of the most boring experiences I've ever listened to. That person is lucky because the station manager or whatever eventually will say, you know, you need to liven up your voice. You need to do anything you can to make your voice more interesting. So us as podcasters, we have a weakness of no one holding us accountable. There's too many of us. And most importantly, we don't operate with a brand umbrella. So here is again one of my obsessions with wrapping myself in other people's brands. And I put up this little picture here from my first business. My first business I did when I was 24, I started a summer camp business. Nothing dorkier or loosier than being in summer camps. But we were pretty good. Hey, Scott, quit laughing at me.
Love it.
When you hear the numbers, you'll be impressed. We operated 89 summer camps simultaneously at places like Georgetown, UCLA, MIT, Stanford, SMU, University of Texas, and all of the big cities. University of Miami, Cambridge, Sorbonne, Oxford, University of Adelaide, University of Sydney, all over the world, in other words. And we were sponsored by people that you see here on this poster. And this is only the top third of the poster. But you can see that we were sponsored by people like Adobe, the Discovery Channel, Sony, Microsoft, EA Games, Hasbro, people like that. We were also sponsored by George Lucas, Intel, people like that. So the way we answered the telephone was Computer Camp, sponsored by Intel and Microsoft, located at MIT and Stanford. How can I help you? Again, obsessing with brand names. So my book, published by McGraw-Hill, you could go through everything in my career and you will see that I associate with brand names as much as possible. Podcasts don't have that opportunity. What do you say? I'm on iTunes? That doesn't do anything. That's no association whatsoever. So if we can change this, if we can say I'm part of blank syndication network, or I'm in these cities. You know, I always point out that I'm in Washington, D.C., and St. Louis, and Tampa, and Milwaukee, and Pittsburgh, and places like that, right? I don't talk about the horrible cities, but because I'm in those good cities, I have the brand of being associated with, I'm in AM, FM radio in Washington, D.C. Again, any way I can wrap myself in someone else's brand. And the fact that podcasters can't do this, I think, is one of the weaknesses. Radio. Radio is dying. Radio is dying. You're right. Only 96% listens once a week. 75% still listen once a day. That's 75% still listen once a day. On the other hand, only 30% of Americans have ever listened to a podcast. Ever. That means they could have listened to one and given up, but still be included. 70% have never listened to a podcast ever, 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 ever. And so we talk about numbers. I want downloads. I want listeners, whatever. 70% of the marketplace is automatically excluded from your numbers. So unless you're reaching out and trying to escape the 30% podcast zone, you'll never get the mass market that you were hoping for. Sure, you could get huge podcast numbers, but still imagine what it would be if you were also on other outlets as well. So you're right, radio is dying. It is projected to die by the year 2100. And there's really good data on this. Gartner did a multi-million-dollar study, and they say radio will be dead in exactly 80 years. 80 years it's going to take to die. Well, I don't know if my show is going to continue past tomorrow, much less next year, right? You know, one of the reasons we do it is we can quit when we want. If I got a good offer to do something else, would I, as a podcaster, quit? Hell yeah. I think most of us would. If all of a sudden we were the CEO of a new company, or our best friend came and said, hey, let's start this business, and we became an entrepreneur and we're working really hard, or all of a sudden Scott's loan purchasing business quadruples because of a change in Oklahoma law, and all of a sudden it becomes infinitely easier in Oklahoma, and all of a sudden he's blooming in Oklahoma, well, he might kill the podcast, right? So we got to be honest here. Our podcasts come and go. And that's one of the reasons that we're not given more prestige and acceptance, because it's too easy to quit. So many people get the pod burn that Tracy and Tom Hazard talk about. I don't know if they talked about it yesterday, but so many of us burn out, right? I had 2 shows I burned out on. The other one, I had a restaurant show. If anyone wants it, it's available. I don't want it anymore. It's got a great pedigree. But we burn out. And so because of that, I don't know, this idea that radio is dying and therefore we podcasters are winning and therefore we're on the right side, numerically just isn't true. That radio is still the king, and we're sort of ignoring it if we don't play along. All right. I want to give you a truism, 2 truisms. From my experience, no one has ever met a radio host. So if you go into a party and you say, hey, I'm a radio host, they'll be like, really? Oh. It's interesting. No one else has run into that before. I mean, it's just not the average profession that you meet. People will find it interesting and sexy. Therefore, you'll get better speaking engagements. And then here's a conversation. And I've had some version of this conversation 1,000 times in the last 5 years. I will say, I'm a radio host. And people will say, oh, you're on the radio? And I'll go, yeah, I'm on 25 stations around the country. I'm in Tampa and Washington and Pittsburgh and Milwaukee, and just sort of drift off, right? You don't need to say Sholo, Arizona, right? And then they will say, well, they'll say, oh, that's really cool. Or they'll say, wow, why aren't you in my city? I'm not in my home city, which is something we'll talk about. I live in Atlanta and I'm not on a station here. I've been trying for 5 years to get on a station here and I've had no success. So people will say, well, why aren't you here in Atlanta? Why don't you have an Atlanta station? They'll say, ooh, that's cool. How'd that happen? Or, ooh, that's neat. I've never met a radio host. Never once have they said, well, oh, you're in Tampa, but tell me about your bad stations. Or are those good stations or are those junky stations? Or what's the signal strength of that tower? Is it a good tower or is it a bad tower? These are questions that people don't ask. No one has ever asked me to quantify, qualify, defend, describe, inscribe, imbibe, well, not imbibe, anything to defend the 25 stations. But I was honest with you at the beginning. I told you most of them are crap in crappy cities. But when I call the Association of Dental Hygienists and they need a speaker at their convention at Disney, and I say, hey, yeah, I'm a nationally syndicated radio host. I'm on 25 stations. Their question is, am I on a station in their city? And if I'm not, they go, well, why aren't you on a station in my city? And that's it. But now I'm competing with people who wrote a book or whatever, and I'm a nationally syndicated radio host. I'm going to get that engagement. I'm going to get it. And the difference that this offers to you, it's just huge for your career. And on the other hand, people are not smart enough to say, oh, I know the radio industry, and here's what I know about the radio industry. You have to buy time there. So the fact that you're on 25 radio stations, to me, means all that means is you bought some time at a bunch of places. That's true, but no one will ever say or know or ask about that. And this is so important to the whole thing. My goal is to get listeners online. My listeners come from online. My prestige comes from being AM FM. And my goal, as I've told Scott, and I've told Scott to hold me accountable for this, is to get on 100 stations. Well, I haven't changed very much. My 25 has hit 25. I haven't grown in 4 or 5 months, and I'm ashamed of that. I'm a bad boy, and I need to work harder. But nevertheless, my goal is 100 stations over time. That's where my prestige comes from. I will get $15,000 speaking gigs because of that, and get my listeners online. Huge distinction. Because let's go through it. Let's go through a station. Okay, let me take one station. This is important. I'm in Macon, Georgia. I'm in the 3rd ranking station in Macon, Georgia. Macon has a population of about 100,000, I think, something like that. At any given time, we can assume that 1% of the population is listening to the radio, divided between 20 stations in Macon. I probably have 40 listeners, 100 listeners maybe on that station. Almost not worth adding up, right? But who cares, because it adds up to 25 stations. Macon and Sholo and that place in Arizona or Washington that I'm in someplace in Washington. Let me check. I like to make fun of it. Colfax, Washington. You add that up with Holbrook and Sholo and a bunch of the Lebanon, a bunch of the Opelika, Alabama. I'm proud of that one.
They all add up, though, don't they?
They add up. That's what matters. They add up, and no one cares. All right. Radio equals more income. All right. Sponsors right now, I have 6. I have one sponsor that you don't find anywhere on my website that pays me more than anybody else. And I've told people who that is, so that's not a big surprise. The inner circle knows that it's India. I get paid by India as one of my sponsors, and I have a certain number of Indian guests, no matter where they live, they're Indian native guests on the show to do that. So I'm honest about that. I get my sponsors, and I get good money from my sponsors. I also get paid for ads. That comes and goes. That's a pain in the ass. Sponsors are long-term, ads are a pain in the ass. I also get paid interviews, and I charge $250 to $500 depending on who I'm selling it to. And for that, I sell them 9 minutes. And in the average month, I will sell 8 of those. So roughly $2,000 to $3,000 a month coming in from paid interviews. And some of those are great. For example, one of those was this CEO and founder of Kickstarter. Amazing interview. But I didn't want to talk about what he wanted to talk about, so it was a paid interview. He wanted to talk about not Kickstarter, but about his new thing where he thinks American corporations should be accountable to society to make society better. So it's Coca-Cola's responsibility to stop fires in Brazil. So that's his belief. So anyway, that's what I charge. And I believe that happens because I'm on the radio. And all of this has happened since I was on the radio. And I've had conversations with some of the publicists who pay me. And those are, of course, the biggest corporations. Interview Valet, for example, you may know them. They're a great company that books podcast guests. They get hired by people to get on podcasts. They're not going to pay. Those guests are not going to pay. But I also have national companies with 5,000 employees whose job it is to get people on radio and on the USA Today and the Today Show and places like that. And they pay. They have a budget. Sometimes their budget's $100,000 for 1 week. And I say, hey, give me 500 of that. Anyway, I've talked to those guys. They've told me that when I hit 50 stations, I can charge $1,000 for 9 minutes. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah. All right. I want to talk about what ads cost. And this is not, this is what the tire shop in Lebanon, Pennsylvania pays to run an ad. So I just want to educate you a little bit about this. So in Atlanta, the 8th highest station, and I used to advertise there, and so I used to work there, and so that's how I know this exact number, is $360 for 1 minute. If you get on a good station, like here in Atlanta, we have WSB, which is one of the top 5 radio stations in the country, based on a number of shows that they syndicate, based on their tower strength, based on their pedigree, all of that kind of stuff. If you get one of their hosts, like Neil Bortz, who I was talking about before, to do the ad for you, that's probably $13,000 to run that spot. 60 seconds of drive time in a big station in LA, $1,000. 60 seconds of Howard Stern, $30,000.
Wow.
Now, if I want to go on that same station, WSB, and buy weekend time, I want to talk about those hours. So this is the cost of buying time on the radio. So you have to understand, and this is so important, radio has one thing to sell: time. Every second of that time is sold either to an ad or to the host. please understand that every single host, every radio host is buying that time. Now, they may work for the station, and in that case, the station owns, and that's a different scenario. But to be syndicated, you don't work for that station. So Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, everybody, the Clark Howards, who does the consumer radio, the bald guy who does the debt snowball, all of those people buy every single second that they're on. So if they're on 280 stations, they're buying time from all of those stations. Then they may buy it in chunks. They may buy 30 stations at a time. That's called syndication. They may buy onesies or whatever, but they're buying that time because that's all the radio station has to sell. The radio station does not sell, or I'm sorry, does not run Rush Limbaugh so that the ads go up. That's not how it works. It works, they sell you the time. Now, the question is, how much of the time are they selling you? When they sell you an hour, that doesn't mean you get an hour. I have syndication deals where that means 54 minutes. I have another one where that means 48 minutes, which means they run 12 minutes of ads in addition to my show. And I can run ads in my show if I want, but that's part of my 48 minutes. I can also have a deal, and I'm working on one of these now, where my cost is reduced, but then I share all of the ad revenue that I make, and they share all of the ad revenue that they make, and I try to sell ads for them. Well, that's a burden because the last thing I want to do is go and sell ads. I just hate that, right? We all do. So we're thinking about that deal. Let it be said, though, there's 25 different ways to do this. There's 10,000 radio stations. You go to the radio station and you cut a deal with them. You could say this: I will give you a 48-minute show and you keep all of the ad time. I won't run any ads in the 48 minutes. You keep the 12 profit minutes. You get 100% of that profit, and that's the deal. That's a good deal for you. That's a good deal for you. Sometimes your cost then gets really, really cheap, but you don't get any revenue, but also you don't have the burden of selling. So that's a good deal. So in Atlanta, WSB is again our signature station, 75 years old, one of the most prestigious stations in the country. If you remember the movie Driving Miss Daisy, they talked about that station in that movie. To buy an hour of weekend time, so if I wanted to be on there right now, it's probably about $1,500. And I can guarantee that no one's listening. Just no one listens to AM, FM radio over the weekend. The numbers just plummet. So WSB would probably get 100,000 listeners on a weekday, on Monday afternoon. They run Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh on the afternoons. They probably have 100,000 listeners total. In the weekend, they probably get 1,000. So I'm saying 1%. They have a 100 time drop off. That's substantial. They're still going to charge you about $1,500 for that hour. Times 4, you have to pay for that for the month. They're going to sell it to you monthly. So you're probably going to be $4,000 to $5,000 a month. In Atlanta, I can find stations for $500 an hour. You can do that. And in a smaller market, some really dumpy cities, maybe like Austin, Texas, or some places like that, you'll be able to get an hour. Hey, Scott. Just seeing if you're listening, Scott.
Oh, I'm here, brother.
You can probably find hours somewhere in that ballpark. $400 to $500 an hour. If you go to Sholo, Arizona, you can get something in the $100 an hour. Those ads, though, are going to sell for $12. You're going to sell an ad to the pizza place for $12, something like that. So just numbers to keep in mind. Also, if you buy a weekday package, Usually you have to buy multiple days. You can't buy just Monday afternoon. You have to buy Monday through Friday afternoon. All right. Having said that, let me back up for just a second. I spend, and I'm really good at this, and I'm buying junky stations, and my number one goal is to increase my station count, not my listener count. I spend $4,000 to $5,000 a month buying airtime for my show, just to let you know. And I could go through each individual deal and show you that, but just to give you a rough idea, I've cut some amazing deals to accomplish such a low number, and I'm giving away almost all of my ad time. So just to let you know, I love the 48-minute deal. I'll run 48 minutes of show with 0 ads, and in return, you get the 12-minute. I do that a lot. That's my number one deal, and it works. So let's go get station number 1. Here's how you get station number 1. It's easier than you think it is. I'm going to check my time.
You're good, Jim. You're doing good.
Okay. I have about 30 minutes left.
Yeah.
All right, great. So I went on that LinkedIn thing. I know Scott loves LinkedIn. He's going to talk about it later today. I typed in radio station manager. And as you see there, I got 200,000 results. Now, I think there's about 12,000 radio stations in the United States. So that number is obviously inflated. I don't really care. All I'm trying to do is get one at each station. And right here, boom, look at the results. They are perfect.
Yeah.
Terry Avery, program director at KISS 104.1.
And that's in Atlanta.
Yeah, is it right here in Atlanta?
Yep.
That is a great station. They have a great morning show. I would love to be on that station. How do you start the process? So simple, it's going to blow you away. I pick up a telephone.
Old-fashioned.
And I call KISS 104.1 and I say, hey, can I speak with Terry Avery? Terry's job is to find you. Terry has a big spreadsheet with days of the week and hours with little blocks, and he has to fill up the entire week, 24 hours times 7 with shows. If he's got a hole in that block, he's going to be ecstatic to talk to you. If he doesn't have a hole, he'll be excited to talk to you because his job is to find you. And it's so much easier when someone does your job for you and simply calls and says, hey, Terry, I'm a podcaster, but I'm trying to make the leap to radio. And I love KISS 104.1. And I think my material would fit in really well. Can I buy you lunch one day to talk about the possibility of adding my show to your station? Terry is going to say yes, or he's going to say, can we talk for 30 minutes on the phone? Whatever. He's going to be receptive to that because that's his job. Or he could say, you know what, we're completely booked right now. We don't need any new shows. And in which case you say, fine, can I buy you lunch anyway so that maybe you'll remember me a year from now when you do need someone? Or is there any other station managers you can introduce me to in Atlanta? See how simple this is.
That is
the
awesome.
Exact same way you do anything else. Now, if Terry blows you off, then I call Louisa Cali, Genesis Radio in Tampa. And I'm going to call Kevin Kilmurray. To be honest, I'm not even going to call him. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to reach out to every one of them on LinkedIn with a note that says, I'm a podcaster about to make the jump to radio, and I would love to connect with you. They're going to hit connect. Now you have their direct email. I would email them the link to your website in your show and say, here's my show. Can I get on there? Because they're going to listen to your show before they're going to put you on air. All right, so go ahead and speed the process up. I've already started doing that process, and I have about I don't know, 450 station managers in the database that I am currently building. And it's the first level contact information for 450 station managers. And you know what? When I get a new station, I email them and say, hey, I got a new station. Maybe you should think about me on your station. You know, or hey, I just won the Small Business Administration Media Award. Do any of your other hosts have big media awards? Yeah, I mean,
simple.
It's simple and it's bragging, but you know what? It's how it works. It's how it works. And I have 204,000 of them. Here's my guy. Gary and I go to lunch once a quarter. He is with Atlanta. He's with Salem Media. You all have heard of Salem, I hope. They are one of the largest owners of radio stations in the United States. They own hundreds of radio stations. Gary and I have been working, and they're also one of the most expensive. When I talk about buying time, this is what I'm talking about. Salem makes their living selling radio time. So Gary and I go to lunch. I'm like, Gary, your station in Atlanta, it's too expensive. He's like, oh, I know. I can get you in blank. Right. So Gary, his job is to get me on the air somewhere. My job is to get on the air with Gary. So Gary and I go to lunch, and we've been trying for a year. And as I said, I have not found a home here in Atlanta yet, but he has found me 3 other homes in that time. Gary is in your city too. You just got to go find him. So I would start looking to see if there's a Salem guy in your city. I would start with that because that's a national syndicated company. You know, they own stations in hundreds of cities. They probably own a station in your city. You want to know the Salem guy in your city. Well, then there's other syndicators too, right? You've heard of them. I would start reaching out to them. Basically, what I would do is build a database of every station that does talk in your city, and then do the research to find out who the station manager or the program director is there, and make that person your new friend. And again, I want to stress that person's job is to find you so they are receptive when you reach out. It's not like a cold call where you're begging Gary Eaton to go to lunch with you. I called Gary the first time and he was like, well, let me hit your website. Oh, wow, this looks great. Oh, wow, you've had some great guests. Oh, I'd love to have lunch. Let's have lunch. Enthusiasm was there. And again, there's 204,000 of them, and they're pretty damn easy to find. Then there's also resources like this. I have used this a little bit. These are some good resources. These are radio resources, not pod resources. These are things that the radio industry looks at. I have considered it, but not yet done. I've thought about running an ad right there where it says America's Radio News. That's an ad block. I could buy that and run that and say, I'm on 25 stations. Why am I not on yours? And I think I would get calls from radio owners, station managers saying, hey, I saw your ad. I listened to a show. Let's talk. These are resources to add to your starting to look through your random surf time. All right. Now I'm going to try to sell. So all of that is how to do it for free, for easy, all of that. I decided that this was something that I'm passionate about. And I'll tell you, the thesis of my radio show, and let's go back to this book. I told you the thesis of this book was so good that they bought it in 1 week with 1 letter. The thesis of this book is that entrepreneurship has nothing to do with creativity, risk, or passion. And we actually defend it. I could care less about passion. I am not passionate. I've sold chairs and purses and jewelry and a lot of junk that I'm not passionate about. I was passionate about the summer camps, and I'm passionate again about Pod 24. After 30 years, I have finally found a new passion. I'm passionate about making you into an AM, FM radio host overnight for as cheaply as possible. Most of you can't afford $5,000, $6,000 a month. I know that. So Pod 24 is already up and running. It's pod24.com. It's a collection of stations, just like Sirius is satellite stations. It's a collection of podcast stations. So we have a station that broadcasts small business shows and nothing else. We have a station that broadcasts real estate and nothing else. Right now we have 7 stations and we're adding up. We just started. We're only 2 weeks old in my mind. And we have 7 stations. We have 15 shows on the small business channel. And that's what we've been promoting. As I said, we've raised a bunch of money to go out there and promote it. And so let me ask you this. You're on iTunes, you're on Stitcher, you're on all of those places. Have those people ever gone out and advertised your show? Have they ever done anything to promote you? I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars up to next month, $100,000 promoting and buying listeners. This is how I got my 150,000 listeners a day, 6 days a week. That gets really close, people, to 1 million listeners a week that I'm getting. I bought them. I paid for them. And that's what Pod 24 is going to do for you. So it does 2 things. You can get on our station, the small business station. We'll advertise the daylights out of it. You will get found there. That station is like a jukebox or a radio station or a TV. It plays the shows back to back to back to back to back. So a listener may come into the middle and hear your show from the middle. But you know what? That's what they're used to because that's what they do in radio. That's what they do in TV. I know that if I turn the TV on at 1:30, I'm going to hit the middle of a TV show. I know that. If I want something from the beginning, I go to my DVR. But what if I don't know what to listen to? And I'm trying to discover new podcasts, or I just want to listen to French cooking. I don't know any French cooking podcasts. I just want to hear some French cooking talk. That's what we do. We make one-click listening possible. The listeners don't need to search. They don't need to go all over the place. They don't need to download. They don't need to store it and then find it later. They click the button and then the thing starts making noise at them, just the way their radio does, just the way the TV does. And if they love the show, boom, there's a list of shows off to the side. They click on the show link and boom, they're on your website. They're on your iTunes. They're on your subscribe button. In other words, I've created a new listener for you. And so number 2, we'll get you nationally syndicated. Now, we're not going to be able to get you nationally syndicated 6 days a week. That costs thousands of dollars. We're going to get you nationally syndicated in the middle of the night in a short amount of time, but it still counts. You will be able to say you're a nationally syndicated radio host. You're not going to get many listeners, but remember, I'm in Macon, Georgia, and I'm not getting many listeners there at 2 p.m, and I don't care because all I want is the prestige of being a nationally syndicated radio host. Pod 24 gives you that overnight. So to do the low end thing, just the listeners, it's $100 a month. And to do the high end, to get you nationally syndicated, is $219 a month. So for $219, you're a nationally syndicated radio host. There's the website and all of the stuff and the schedule, and you're there with other hosts, and it's a whole show and all of that kind of stuff. It's 100% real, 100% legit. It's just going to run in the middle of the night. No one's going to listen to it. People will listen to it online, though, and we'll promote the daylights out of it online. You'll get the listeners there. You'll get the prestige of being nationally syndicated. And for that $220, I can get you 17 stations. 17 stations for $220 a month, nationally syndicated starting tomorrow. And then I'm going to go spend $100,000 promoting you, which I don't think anyone else is going to do. So in week 2, we had over 10,000 listeners an hour in week 2. So I would ask you this: in the second week of your podcast, how many listeners did you get? And then did you then follow that up with $100,000 a month budget? That's what I'm doing. And so my goal here is to give you thousands of new listeners. I am just like you. I die when I don't get listeners. I look at the numbers. I'm like, I had 12 listeners today. It hurts. It hurts. This isn't important. I do a podcast because I care and I want people to listen and I want listeners to have this great content. And so to not have listeners kills me. I know this feeling. I feel the same way. I think I can solve that problem for you. And I think I can help you get book deals because I'm going to make you sexier, more unique, more compelling, turn you into a nationally syndicated radio host. That's all I got to say. Here's my contact information. You can go to Pod24 right now and just sign up and just do it. It's automated. It's working. I would rather you come in through me and we work one-on-one and do some things together. We're trying to onboard 1 show a day right now, which we're doing. And so that would be wonderful if you would just send me an email and say, hey, I'd like to be nationally syndicated. And we'll get you up and running real fast. That's my stuff, Scott. That's what I have to say.
That's good stuff, Jim. I actually pulled up Pod24. If you want, you want to unshare your slides? I can pull it up so people can kind of take a look at it a little bit. We talk.
Sure. Help me. Meeting control.
You said stop share. You see where
on what screen?
On the Zoom control panel where it says stop share. Should maybe up at the top.
I'm sorry. There it is.
Right. Okay, cool. Let me share my screen now. So I've got this up here. Here you go, guys. Yeah, you've got channels for small biz, real estate, news, sports, finance, politics, crime.
And we have countless more stations coming. Right. So next month we'll be adding a crypto station, a relationship state or channel, a politics channel. We have 40 more stations coming in the next month. So we're pounding out the stations. And as we add those, we'll be going into that community and inviting podcasters in that space to join.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awesome. What questions do you guys that are watching or listening have for Jim out here? On your I had a question with the emails that you created on the 400 station managers. How often are you emailing them out as you add a new station? Once a week, once a month, as something pops up?
Only when there's something new and significant to say.
Okay.
I'm not hitting them with regularity.
Okay. That's good stuff. This is Jim, you've given so much knowledge on here, man. That's what I love. I mean, I've been paying attention here, listening. I'm like, oh, that's a good one. Oh, that's a good one. Let's see, I got a question here from, let's see here, Larry. What if I give all the ad time to Jim? Could I snag some time?
No, I understand where you're going with that. I'm not. You mean if you were to be nationally syndicated, Larry, that ad time is already sold, and that's why we're able to get the cheap price.
Mm-hmm. So, are you talking about on your show, Readily Random, Larry? If you're doing it outside of the Pod24, I'm not.
No, the last thing I want is more ad time to sell.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I know.
So I hate selling ad time. I would rather eat glass. Sorry. I mean, all of us hate it. Going to the pizzeria and saying buy ad time. I mean, it's just miserable.
Yeah, that's miserable. True. That's true.
Sell sponsorships instead, people. Oh, can I give my number one sponsorship tip? I didn't mention that.
I was just going to ask that. Yes, please do.
So if I go to Wells Fargo and say, Wells Fargo should sponsor my show, you have 12,000 small business bankers whose job it is to talk to small businesses. You have a huge staff dedicated to this. I'm right up your alley. Wells Fargo is iffy. I then go to them and say, now, what about this? Every week, whatever, I will put 3 Wells Fargo customers on my show. You go to your small business bankers and say, we're not having a contest or anything, but if you've got a cool, sexy story, we can get it on the radio. So has Wells Fargo or your banker ever come to you and said, Larry, you're so cool, I got you a free radio spot? Your bank doesn't do that. That would be extraordinary value from your banker if your banker was to get you free PR. What Wells Fargo loves now is they get to go to their customers and say, hey, we got this radio relationship. We can get you, our customer, on the radio. While you're there, we would really appreciate it if you would say something nice about Wells Fargo. Now, Wells Fargo is out there giving away valuable stuff that people want. You mean I get to be on the radio? My wife gets to listen to me on the radio, all because of my checking account here? Yes, sir. Wells Fargo loves that. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yeah, it totally does make sense. Yeah, we're going to feature 3 of your clients, 3 of your satisfied clients every week. Yeah, that makes really good sense.
So Wells Fargo is now giving that away. It makes them look like a huge value add, and they can go and cherry pick who they want to give it to.
So their best, it becomes a selling point for them with bigger clients and their ad space. I mean, it's as an ex-banker, yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, it's part of why I bring on coaching students that are succeeding stuff. It works as a testimonial, a real live testimonial, versus just me saying I'm so awesome. Oh, hey, here's 3 people to tell you how awesome I am.
Right. And so think about it. I get a client that's paid. I get a guest that's paid, probably going to be an amazing guest because Wells Fargo is not going to select chumps, you know, and it makes my sponsorship deal better. And I didn't have to go find that person. They got given to me.
I love it. That's awesome. What questions? What else? That was a good one, huh, Larry? Hoops, hang on here. Stop share. Oh, here's another question here. Nancy asked, are you adding a health category or do you have one?
Oh, yes. We have health is one of the ones that we're going to have to break up into several different categories, but we will start off with health and then it will divide over time into more subcategories that are a little more specific. But yes, health is one of our biggest ones.
That's good stuff.
And also relationships, sexuality, politics. We've gone through and made a list of the top 100 categories, and that will eventually be our top 100 stations.
Yeah, Jim's done a really good job of doing a lot of scrubbing and pulling and reaching out. And I'm really excited about this of what he's done because and that's the thing, you've leveraged shows and you've reached out to sponsors. That's why you're able to get some VC stuff to help promote behind it because they see the value in what you're doing and what you're carving out here and owning the market. Yeah, good stuff, man. Anyway,
I just hope everyone goes and gets on a radio station. It's worth it.
Yeah.
Even if you just do it in your local city, your career in that city will explode. Explode. All of a sudden, your speaking opportunities will double. It's just invaluable for your career.
Yeah, one of the things you gave me a tip a while back we're working on of reaching out to your local SBA department. The Small Business Administration's office and contacting them and seeing what kind of media awards they have or say, hey, I'm starting a podcast. I'm going to be interviewing local entrepreneurs, local business owners. How can I help? And they'll often be more than happy to refer new entrepreneurs and business owners to you. We actually have that in the works here in Austin right now. So I'm taking your advice and counsel and implementing it.
You get good guests that you don't have to do the research to find. Someone else finds them for you. And that person at the SBA looks good because they get to give away something extra for free that they didn't promise. Oh, just because you're an SBA friend, you get to be on the radio. And then 2 years from now, that person will nominate you for the SBA award.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. I love it, Jim.
And if they don't, you ask them
to
nominate you. So here, Scott, my guy quit. I got a new guy now.
Yeah.
And that award is 3 or 4 years old. I'm thinking it's time to get a new one.
There you go.
From a new guy.
Yeah.
So I'm taking the new guy to lunch. I'm serious. I'm totally serious. I take the new guy to lunch. I get some of his clients on. I do him some favors. 6 months from now, I ask him, hey, I know I got the award 3, 4 years ago, but it's been a while and I've grown a lot since then.
Time to pony up. We're helping.
Hurry up.
That's right. I love it, man. That's why I love listening to you, man. You get so much great tips, great counsel. There you go. Any other final questions before we let Jim get back to his Sunday morning out there? Guys, go check it out, pod24.com. Jim, what's the best way, or if you'd rather have them reach out to you directly for Pod24 to talk with you, give you some...
Yeah, I these first few people, especially the people on your inside group here, I'd like to hold their hand. So if they would email me at, james.beach@att.net, that would be the best thing. And we'll hold their hand and make sure that we want to treat these first customers nice so they talk good about us.
There you go. Exactly. Good stuff, Jim. Well, hey, man, thanks for coming out and sharing some great knowledge here, great insight, and really helping people to take that step to really add the credibility to what they're doing. I appreciate it so much, Jim. And what size of Pod24, baby? That's right. What size of shirt do you wear, my friend?
I'd like a double XL.
Double XL. I'll get one out to you.
Excellent. Thanks.
Awesome. Great,
all
guys.
Right. Have a great day, and I can't wait to hear all the other speakers. Say hello to Kim for me. I'll probably be on for Kim. I want to hear what she's got to say.
Good stuff, man.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks, Jim. All right, guys. We're going to